Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's discussion as part of the Practice Makes Perfect discussion series. We're so excited to have you all join us. My name is Michael Vodianoy, and before we get into today's discussion, based on the subject and our guests today, I wanted to take a couple minutes to reintroduce this series, introduce myself for those that aren't familiar with what we've been doing, and then we'll introduce our guests and get into it. So again, by way of introduction, my name is Michael Vodianoy. I'm an I-O psychology professional by training. I'm based in Toronto, Canada. Currently, I work as a leadership strategist with DDI, where I help clients develop their leadership capabilities through leadership assessment and training programs. And I just want to share a little bit of background for what we're doing here today and broadly what the goal of this discussion series podcast is. So going back a few years, as a young I-O psych out of school, I was working in marketing, and I was in touch with a lot of Canadian organizational psychologists who were asking the question, how can we market and promote ourselves as professionals and our field broadly in Canada? And I was seeing that there wasn't a lot of awareness. And so that led me to write an article, do some speaking, go on a couple podcasts, and really start thinking about how I could apply some of the things I was doing in marketing to help organizational psychologists promote and build awareness for the work that we do. And so that was really the beginning of my partnership with CSIOP, which is the Canadian Society of Industrial Organizational Psychologists. And over the years, I've continued to think about how we market ourselves, how we advocate for the work that we do broadly. And then last year, I got to partner with CSIOP again as a contributor to the quarterly newsletter, where I contribute a column to highlight the work of practitioners in our field. And from there, I just started brainstorming and thinking about how I could build on that and engage the community more broadly and selfishly get to meet some industry leaders and learn about topics that I care about and that I think are relevant and important to members of our community. And so that has evolved into the discussion series that you're joining today. So I'd like to encourage everybody who's with us, first of all, say hello in the comments, take a note, share who you are, where you're joining us from. We'd love to say hello and see who's with us. I'd also like to encourage you to connect with me, to follow CSIOP, and as well as our guest today on LinkedIn. Now, a little bit of background for today's discussion. A couple of months ago, I was asked to join a panel to award and recognize members of our community in both the fields of practice and in academia for their contributions. And through those conversations, I was introduced to our guests today, and I thought it would be a fantastic opportunity to get to know them a little bit better, what drives them, and get their perspectives on their respective areas of expertise and their perspectives on the state of our field broadly. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Deb Powell, who's going to join us. Deb is a past chair of CSIOP. Deb, give us a wave. I think, yeah, there you are. And we're very excited to have you to introduce our guests and to recognize them for the awards that they're receiving.
Okay, great, thank you. So just to, I'm Deborah Powell. I'm a professor at the University of Guelph, and I'm also the past chair of CSIOP, which is a section of the Canadian Psychological Association. We have about 200 members who are academics, practitioners, and students who have an interest in I-O psychology. And for the first time this year, we've started giving out some awards, two new awards. One is for an outstanding researcher, a new researcher who's graduated within the last 5 years. And the second award is for an outstanding practitioner. So this year's winner of the CSIOP Outstanding New Researcher Award is Dr. Duygu Gulseren. She graduated from St. Mary's in 2021 and right now is an assistant professor in human resources at York University. Her research focuses on leadership and occupational health psychology, and she's had a really big impact with her work on chronic pain and has done a great deal to add kind of a workplace perspective to what's often been viewed as an individual phenomenon. And as I read her CV, I had to, in all the publications, and there was well over 20, I had to just go back and double check that I'd read her graduation date correctly, because she has accomplished a lot. So congratulations on this very well-deserved award. This year's winner of the Outstanding Practitioner Award is Dr. Helen Ofosu. Dr. Ofosu received her PhD in applied social psychology with a specialization in I-O from the University of Windsor. And she's had influence on I-O psychology across a number of different sectors, so including the public service, universities, and also the private sector. She's heavily involved in the Canadian Psychological Association and was a co-founder of a new section of CPA, the Section for Black Psychology, which I've heard has over 100 members already. So it's a growing and very active and busy section. She's currently an executive coach, career coach, and human resource consultant, and helps her clients navigate their way around significant career challenges, often relating to forms of harassment, diversity, or underemployment. So thank you for all of your contributions to I-O Psychology, and congratulations on this well-deserved award.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deb. And congratulations to our well-deserving award winners. So what we're going to do is do some individual conversations to get to know Helen and Duygu a little bit better, and then we will reconvene collectively for a broader discussion as well. So bear with me for one moment while we sort that out. All right. Helen, welcome. Congratulations. Again, as somebody who was involved in some of the discussions related to this award, your body of work is extremely impressive, and I'm very excited to get to know you a little bit better. And so I wanted to ask if you could tell us a little bit more about your journey through the world of organizational psychology and what drives your professional efforts.
Well, thank you for having me, and I really want to express my gratitude for this award. So much of my work happens behind the scenes, so this kind of public acknowledgement is a bit unusual, so I appreciate it. So I started my career in the federal public service. I had done my mandatory internship with the Public Service Commission, and I was happy to have an offer of employment before I graduated. So that's where I started. And I kind of thought I would transition from there into the private sector at some point, but I ended up staying a lot longer than I expected, mostly because of parenting responsibilities and wanting to have a better work-life balance. When I was in the public service, in addition to working at the Public Service Commission, doing, basically research and development work, so sometimes developing behaviorally based ways to evaluate job candidates and applicants to development programs. I did that kind of work off and on for about 8 years, but I did similar work at Global Affairs and also at the Department of National Defense. And so some circumstances changed for me in 2011, 2012. And that became my chance to launch myself into the private sector. So since then, I've continued to do some of the things that I was doing in the public service. So still some executive search, sometimes some applied research projects, other HR interventions, and certainly a lot of executive coaching and career coaching. So that's the highlights in terms of how I got here.
That's awesome. So you've touched a lot of different areas. And I was wondering if there are some core themes or values or narrative drivers that carry you through some of those different experiences.
Well, I think the big unifying theme is just the value and the precision and the strength and rigor that comes from I-O psychology. It's a very versatile field because I'm using it as a foundation for a bunch of different things. And I think one of the big core drivers is infusing inclusion into the work. And I'd say in 2018, 2019, I realized that inclusion isn't really for only the equity deserving groups or the equity seeking groups. I came across some research that was probably done by I-O adjacent folks who had done some applied research and realized that in a workplace, a sample of about 3,500 people, 67% of the employees were covering up something about themselves that they didn't think was welcome or valued in their organization. So of course that included racialized people, especially Black people, members of the Pride community. But what stuck out to me was the fact that more than half of the white men in that sample were also covering. They might have been downplaying a religious orientation or a disability or the fact that they were in a relationship with a racialized person. But for me, the bigger takeaway was how prevalent it was. So clearly this sample was showing that a lot of people just don't feel that they can truly be themselves at work. So that's problematic, not only because of what it does to individuals, but it's also problematic because it now means that, if you have a workplace with most people funneling a lot of their energy and their bandwidth and their creativity into self-protection and survival, well, that means there's a lot of leakage away from the work they should be doing. So that's something that has a ton of implications in terms of organizational culture, in terms of productivity, in terms of probably racialized and other versions of trauma that create this need in the first place. So it's something that kind of ties together a lot of issues. And it has an impact in terms of leadership styles that are useful for, removing those kinds of hidden barriers or not so hidden barriers. It also has an implication in terms of how people show up as leaders and as professionals. So there are a lot of threads that have been preoccupying me lately about all of this.
Yeah, I love your perspective on that. And I think it gets at a broad culture that we enforce in quiet ways in the professional world. And it's not limited, though that's probably experienced very differently amongst different groups of people. And then in your work, as you mentioned, you've touched people at the individual level from a coaching perspective, consulting and research. Likely you've touched sort of a broader organizational structure. And I'm curious what levers you're thinking about most when it comes to fostering that safety and inclusion in an organization that would enable people to be more open and authentic.
Well, it's multi-layered, as you can imagine. But I think the first piece is just helping people realize that these are issues. Because for some people, they've been feeling it. So for them, they've known it's there, even though they may not have been articulating it. But awareness is the first piece. And then taking some concrete actions to hopefully make things more inclusive. So providing some leadership support so that people understand what kinds of cultures they're creating, and trying to basically embed some other things, some anti-racist practices, some organizational interventions, things like more intentional sponsorship, more awareness around biases that are kind of making their way into assessments and into performance management, leadership development that's more equitable and in some cases more focused to make sure that more people are included, reconsidering what leadership means and what high potential means. I'm super grateful for the work of Adam Grant. I'm looking forward to reading his book on potential, because I sometimes think that our definitions of potential have been far too narrow, and we're leaving a lot of value on the table, so to speak.
Absolutely. And like you said, it's multi-layered. There's a lot of pieces that go into it. And that first piece, like you said, being awareness, can be such a big part of what can become an intervention that can make a difference. So I appreciate you sharing that. As I was getting to know you a little bit and your work. You have such an impressive body of contributions to thought leadership in the public sphere. And as such a public representative of the work that you do and broadly organizational psychology and the work that we try to do and the impact we try to have, I'm curious if you could share what that experience has been like for you and some things that you've learned about our place in the world of work and even broadly in the world in general.
I appreciate your kind words first. And I think, going back to your earlier point about our positioning as I-O psychologists, number one, our title is so clunky. I'm sure that doesn't help, right? Most online forums have a limited number of characters. So typing in industrial and organizational psychology by itself, we may run out. And I think outside of the field, nobody's really heard of us. Most people know of HR consultants, they know of leadership experts, they know of coaches. And the truth is that we all have so much that we can contribute to these domains, whether we're academics or practitioners. So I really hope that more of us, step into these roles and share what we can, because we have a lot of gravitas behind us and a lot more theory and evidence-based information that could really help people make a lot of progress in their work.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a very similar theme when I started talking about this and thinking about the barriers to growing our field. I thought about the name. I've been connected with movements and people that have tried to change and update it. And I think it reflects a bit of an orientation that organizational psychologists have as people who are very typically analytical and process oriented, because it's quite an accurate name and encompasses different parts of what organizational psychologists do. But from a branding perspective, it is a very challenging name. And often people don't identify with it, and it creates challenges to actually build awareness and get a foothold with it. So that's been my own experience, and it seems like it's been yours as well.
It has, but the truth is that there are a lot of people out there who may have no degrees, lots of practical experience, and they make much bigger claims than most of us do. So I think that we should kind of, step into our roles with a bit more swagger, a little bit more boldly, because we kind of have the goods.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. And we need to find ways to say it that other people can understand, right? So less jargon, more plain language. Yeah.
Yes, spot on.
So your forum right now is terrific.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And again, agreed. Swagger, brevity, not always the types of things you see in the I-O Psych professional circles, but I'm glad you call it out, because I think it's important to be thinking about that and collectively take ownership and responsibility of how we promote ourselves as professionals individually and collectively our field as well. And that's what we're trying to do. So I'm so glad that you are doing that work and that you're joining the discussion today. And I want to, before we go to Duygu, encourage everybody who's with us, if you have any comments, any questions for Helen, or anything else related to this conversation, please put them in the chat and I will circle back to them, because I'm already seeing some things come up, and I want to acknowledge that, and I want to make sure that we're going to circle back to that. So Helen, thank you so much. We're going to bring you back shortly.
All right.
And thank you. And with that, we will add Duygu.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you? How was backstage?
It's good. I was just listening, so that's great. And this is the first time I actually am listening to Helen, and she explains everything so calmly and smoothly. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Well, congratulations on your recognition as an early career I-O Psych academic. Again, as somebody who had the opportunity to be exposed to your body of work through this process, it is extremely impressive. It is also, I think, creates a lot of opportunity for different things to talk about, because you're interests span broadly and the type of work that you do. And so I wanted to ask if you could also introduce us a little bit to your journey through the world of I-O psychology and what really drives you and pushes you forward.
Of course. But before I start, I just want to repeat my thanks. I thank you and Deb and other panel reviewers for participating in this, award. I know it takes a lot of time to review, submissions and make decisions and have all those discussions. So I really appreciate your time and effort and recognition. Thank you. And as that introduced me before, my name is Duygu Biricik Gulseren. This is a Turkish name, a difficult name to pronounce. I don't get upset if you're unable to pronounce it when we meet. So I am an assistant professor at the School of Human Resources Management at York University. But although I am in an HR school, I am trained as an industrial and organizational psychologist. So my bachelor's degree is actually in chemical and biological engineering. So it is another field with a long name and not very well known by everyone. So what is chemical and biological? I have a master's in social and organizational psychology, another long title, and I had my PhD in industrial and organizational psychology. And in terms of my research areas, I'm primarily a researcher and a teacher and then consultant. But I mostly identify as a researcher, and I am trained mostly in occupational health and safety. So occupational health psychology, this is what my primary area of interest. And within occupational health psychology, I'm particularly interested in leading healthy workplaces and chronic pain and mental health in the workplace. So these are, I refer them as invisible disabilities. So they are there, but we don't see whether a person has chronic pain or a mental health challenge. But I've also participated in other types of research broadly in industrial and organizational psychology.
Yeah, that's amazing. And as somebody with another unusual last name, I think I can relate to your challenges there a little bit. But with respect to what you said, like individual or rather invisible disabilities and things that people are experiencing, I'm curious, pandemic hits, what does that mean for you? And how, we're in a world of long COVID and hybrid work, and where, as a researcher, like, where did you go with all of that?
Well, it is unfortunate that we had to experience a pandemic at this scale, and many people lost their lives and livelihoods. So it was a traumatic event from a global perspective. But it also, I think, showed that health and safety is so critical and so foundational for work and for life in general. So, like 50 years ago, I-O psychologists, although when we look at the history of industrial and organizational psychology, we see a cyclical trend. So health and well-being is important, productivity is important. Hey, but to become productive, we need health and well-being. Oh yeah, but productivity is important too.
Right.
So I think pandemic brought us to an era, or brought us back to an era where we started talking more about health and well-being, because we saw that without, when we're not well, we experience things beyond the health and well-being sphere. So it creates a domino effect. I think COVID in that sense reminded us that health and well-being is important for the survival of the society, not just for organizations.
Absolutely. Did you find that any of your past work had become sort of more relevant to some of the things that people were experiencing, or were there some specific questions within occupational health and safety and the types of things that you were focused on that you started to dig deeper into?
Not in that sense. So like COVID, I actually, many of my colleagues stopped everything that they do and turned their attention to understand COVID better. I kept on going my existing, kept on working on my existing research program. But from a disabilities perspective, actually COVID and my research in that sense was an interesting era because not the COVID per se, but the increased trend of working from home was interesting in terms of reducing the inequalities between people who have, like employees who have disabilities and who don't. Because especially in chronic pain, when I conduct qualitative interviews with employees who have chronic pain, they one of the common themes that is shared with me is this, need to take rest without having to ask for permission. So when people were working from home, it was easier for them to, to take care of themselves and their needs, but still continue working. And also, I think, those disclosure issues and accommodation issues, they were a bit relaxed when everyone was working from home. So in that sense, it was an interesting observation for me.
Yeah, I can definitely see how that becomes a really relevant point of conversation, and how people balance the maintenance of their well-being throughout the day in different professional environments. I think plays a big part in that. Within the many areas of interest you have, including that broad umbrella of occupational health, I'm curious how you identify the types of questions that you want to focus on. And obviously, the research process takes time and a considerable amount of effort. And so the answer to that question likely has a big impact for you. I'm curious what the process looks like.
You mean the general process of research production?
Well, the how you identify the types of questions that you're going to investigate from a research perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. It's a very, very good question, and I'm glad that you asked this. So it depends. It depends on the topic that I'm working on. So I've been doing chronic pain research quite a while now, and now the very first question that I asked myself when I come up with a new research idea is, what do I need? What do I need to know to be able to continue doing my research in this area? So I primarily I think from from a personal lens, but like as when you spend so much time in working on and reading on and analyzing data on a particular topic, the topics actually come and talk to you. But when I work with PhD students, I see that they have their own questions that they want to answer. So then we start having a discussion, a conversation, and that conversation leads to places that neither of us have explored before. So in a sense, all I'm trying to say is I think I have three different ways of coming up with ideas. So one is what do I need to do research in this area? What does research want me to do, and what worlds can we create when we have a discussion with other researchers?
Well, I love that in part because it feels like an artist's lens on the scientific process. There is a bit of intuition and experience and practical engagement that you have with these questions in a deep way that, like you said, it does speak to you. It does help shape how you think about it.
Exactly. And I actually, this is very interesting that you brought this up, because I've been thinking about this these days. And I've started developing an interest in designers' lives. So how do design is such a creative process, but there's a scientific limits to it. It's not like pure form of art, but you are constrained with the worldly limits almost. So I think our process is very similar to those of designers. So we have scientific limits, we have our tools and theories, but there's also a lot of room for imagination too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like people who are less oriented to what that experience is like wouldn't fully appreciate the creativity. There's also like a philosophical element that goes underneath all of the work that you do. So it's extremely multifaceted, and to be exceptional in an area like that, and for you to be recognized for the work that you're doing, your ability to communicate, your ability to make sense of these types of challenges, I think goes a really long way over and above what you might see written, strictly speaking, in the body of a paper. So again, congratulations to you. And with that, we'll bring Helen back on. Here we are. Hi, Helen.
Hey there. I appreciated listening to Duygu's description. I'm curious. I'm fascinated. I'm intrigued. In my world, I interact with a good number of people who are having challenges in the workplace, whether because of exclusion, because maybe they have a disability or they're another underrepresented group member. But in my world, I see a lot of people who end up on short-term or long-term disability, not because they've had a heart attack or a stroke or cancer, but rather because of what's happened to them at work in terms of mistreatment. So I'm curious, in your research, are you noticing the same trend?
Yes. So, I mean, when we look at workers' compensation claims, by far the biggest reason is mental health issues, and those mental health issues, because it's a workers' compensation board, workers' compensation claim. Most of them are related to work and things that happen at work.
Mm-hmm. So this is kind of a reminder that things like psychological safety are not just touchy-feely, woohoo topics. These are really fundamental to what's happening to employees in terms of their humanity and their treatment. And ultimately, it's impacting the bottom line.
Exactly. It has serious consequences. I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And as Duygu mentioned, the sort of push and pull of well-being and performance, and the chicken and egg battle that seems to just happen as the focus of culture shifts, right? But they're always intertwined, right? And they mutually support each other. So I appreciate you both sharing that. And so for the next little while, I wanted to speak to the both of you about some broader issues within I-O psychology. But before I do, I wanted to highlight a couple of comments coming through from Anda. One is a reaction to Helen's discussion earlier, and one to Duygu. So maybe I'll briefly show them in turn. We can react to those, and then we'll carry forward. So this one is directed towards Helen. So I'll read it briefly. On the matter of authenticity, not everyone wants or needs to bring their whole self to work, and organizational places where this is forced can be equally excluding. What we need is recognition that for everyone, there is more than meets the eye, even if this is not about legally protected characteristics, and that the need is to practice sensitivity and listening and accommodating perspectives. And I think that reaction really reinforces a lot of what you shared, especially in your reaction to some of the research that you shared, that it's not just about the individual orientations, though certainly it factors in, but to building awareness and sensitivity broadly to the different types of experiences that people have.
Well, I agree. I mean, to me, part of that comment is tied to boundaries. And depending on somebody's orientation, their preferences, yes, of course, they may have a personal version of themselves that stays with their interactions with their friends and family, and a professional self that shows up at work. But what I'm getting at is much more than that. I think we need to have workplaces where people feel safe to contribute. I'm not saying they need to bring everything necessarily to work, because some people, prefer to have more separation between their work and life, right? So I respect that, but I would rather see a workplace where people don't feel the need to spend so much effort protecting themselves from mistreatment, whether that's mistreatment in terms of, kind of classic bullying and harassment, or more specific mistreatment that's linked to their identity.
I think that's well said. And I think anybody who has faced that, the effort and there's kind of an exhaustion that goes along with that protective, being aware, sort of activated mode. And I think anybody who's experienced it will understand what you're talking about. And as you said, most of us have to some degree or other. So I appreciate you sharing that. And I will share another question again from Anda. Anda, thank you for your questions. This one directed to Duygu. So can I ask whether an impact was identified from home working that came with the expectation to be always on, connected, and available for people with chronic pain or other conditions that need frequent breaks, movement, etc.?
So thank you, Anda, for asking this question. It is a very, very valid and interesting question. I'm not aware of any research on this particular topic. Not for all, I'm aware of research on this particular group topic, but not on this particular group. So not for people with chronic pain or other disabilities. But in general, we've seen an increase in technostress during the work from home period when everyone was working from home. We know, anecdotally, though, some organizations required their employees to keep their cameras on all day, or they had monitoring devices in employer provided computers so that they can track your mouse movements, so on. So and these are these are not easy requirements for employees. This is, of course, stress inducing, and they can even be perceived as micromanagement, microaggression. So, but we know, at least in the research, we know that the employees with disabilities group in general, there could be individual cases or anecdotes, but in general, employees with disabilities were generally satisfied with everyone was working from home because of the reasons that I shared in my a few minutes ago. Like, I don't have to disclose my needs every day. I don't need to ask for an accommodation. And I know research on pregnant employees during working from home. Again, same. I don't have to disclose my pregnancy. My colleagues don't see me my belly on the camera, so they could hide it. They could avoid the pregnancy discrimination as well. So I think there are both pros and cons. It's just a different environment. Of course, like social isolation and social aspects of working from home was hard for many people, and it was mentally distressing for many people. But there were some advantages as well.
A related point, I have some clients who had visible or invisible disabilities, and they said one of the silver linings for them was that working from home basically leveled the playing field.
Yes.
Right? Instead of, dealing with all kinds of side eye and, whatever, because they wanted to work a little differently, everyone was doing it. So it just went away.
But I can imagine, the specific situation that Anda asked in her question was what if I am being monitored, 8 hours, and I have chronic pain and I just can't, take care of myself. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, again, I think, like you said, there's pros and or let's say opportunities and challenges that can go along with it, where maybe you're always on, maybe you are challenged by the blurring of the lines between your personal and professional, or you have that opportunity to create a buffer and to create space for yourself. And it might look different for different people. And that might lead people to feel very strongly one way or another about what their experiences look like. So I appreciate, again, and of the questions and the comments, I appreciate it. And to you both for sharing your thoughts. So in the time that we have left, you both have shared quite a bit about topics of personal interest, of your own expertise that you invest a lot of your focus into. But at the same time, you are embedded within organizations, you speak to a lot of people in the professional sphere. And as organizational psychologists who might be watching this or thinking about what's coming up and what are some of the big challenges that the people in the world of work are facing that we as organizational psychologists can be thinking about, I'm curious what comes to mind as like those big challenges that you're seeing that you might be able to share and speak about.
I think for me, one of my big preoccupations is looking at how employees and work environments have evolved, particularly since the pandemic. And almost anyone who is paying attention will admit that things are very complicated. Not only have we had this unplanned, massive organizational change, right? So now remote and hybrid work. Plus, we've had the impact of, much more attention on things like equity, diversity, inclusion, anti-racism. That's another huge change. And now, of course, we have other changes layered in there in terms of, integrating AI and artificial general intelligence into the workplace. So these are all big. Even if it was one of these things, it'd be big. But all three, that's juicy, to put it mildly. So I think that there are amazing opportunities for organizational psychologists, right? I mean, these are going to require nuanced, big ideas and interventions to make sense of. So I think there are huge opportunities for us.
Absolutely. When I think about what we offer as a field is a perspective on the psychology of people at work and a process of interrogating that meaningfully, the technological changes, anything that we are doing, it comes down to the psychology of of people and how we operate and how we interact with each other and how we think about ourselves and derive meaning and value from what we do. So artificial intelligence, huge topic, changing, flexible, hybrid work, all of that layered in over existing, cultural, interpersonal challenges that have been there forever. Extremely fascinating.
Yeah. And the other piece I'd add is that in most organizations, there is this kind of resistant problem related to problematic culture. And some of that has been enabled by a particular brand of leadership. So I think that really the types of leadership that got us here may not be sufficient to get us where we need to go. So I think we do need to be rethinking what kinds of leadership make sense going forward. So more people focused, probably more courageous, and more inclusive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Duygu, what do you think?
I definitely agree with Helen in terms of this, AI discussion, because AI became more widespread in such a time where we are in history. We just started talking about diversity and inclusion and belongingness, and then now we have AI or robots as co-workers, and we as humans have not yet figured out how to work together in a harmonious way, and now we need to start thinking about how we are going to work with robots along with other diverse groups of employees. I think this is a very interesting and a challenging question. And to me personally, another question that is becoming more important every day is this loneliness in like the topic of loneliness in general, and how workplaces contribute or mitigate loneliness in people's experience in their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And again, tied in with work from home. But I love your point. We just started thinking about how we can work together better, and now we're all going to be obsolete because the machines are taking over anyway. So, it's an interesting time. But yes, to your point, the intersection of the shifting dynamics of our work culture and experiences and its psychological impacts and the well-being and mental health impacts that we are starting to observe and likely can't even really predict at this point, I think are going to be rich areas for us as a field to really be thinking about. So I appreciate you sharing your perspective on that. An area that, like I sort of mentioned in my introduction, that I've been thinking about a lot for a number of years has been the collaboration and mutual support between the arms of our field, being the academic, theory-driven, scientific component and the practice, implementation, boots on the ground type experience. And I thought that was part of the inspiration for me to have this conversation, is that I had that opportunity to talk to people that represent those arms. And I'd love to get your perspective now that you've shared a whole host of challenges and topics and rich areas for investigation that we can be thinking about. How well are these arms working together to create an added value? I'd love to get your perspectives on it, what we could be doing more.
I'm just glad I got to meet Duygu in this context, because now I can find her and maybe we could work together.
Exactly. Yeah, this is how it works.
You're saying this conversation.
This conversation.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, this conversation and CSIOP for sure. I mean, for myself personally, because I have a busy work life and I try to have a personal life, and I'm the chair of the Black Psychology section, which is it's a bigger role than meets the eye. It's a very busy section. I just haven't had a chance to really do as much collaborating with colleagues who are researchers. I mean, to some limited extent with colleagues at Carleton University, but we have a big section and lots of academics. So I think there are definitely more opportunities for collaboration.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Helen, and also like I appreciate conversations like this, because these are the venues that bring researchers and practitioners, I-O psychologists together, and we you ask the same question, we answer, maybe sometimes we share our perspectives, sometimes we differ, but I definitely think that such conversations are really helpful in terms of understanding each other. But also, I think people who with advanced degrees in industrial and organizational psychology, who work in real life organizations, are actually knowledge brokers. Like I think they are doing a huge favor for the field, because like when I want to collaborate with an organization, if there's an I-O psychologist in the organization, I know that they understand me. I know that they understand what I'm trying to do. So it's easy to communicate with them compared to, let's say, someone without an I-O degree. In the past, I've been fortunate enough to receive data, like collected data, high quality, high sample size, like very, valuable from a research perspective. And those data sets are created, or those data are collected by, again, I-O psychologists working in the organization. They want to answer a practical question, but they thought that it would be best understood through research. So I think there are opportunities, and I think those opportunities are increasing compared to, let's say, 10 years ago.
And I think I would love to see more opportunities for graduate students to learn about how to apply I-O psychology in organizations. So more consultation and intervention. Not to say there isn't room for other professionals who have an HR background or other backgrounds, but we are really, really well positioned to do some of this work. And I just don't think we necessarily are involved as much as we could be.
Yeah, and also, if it's okay for me to say this, Michael, but I created an industrial academic collaborations group for I-O psychologists on LinkedIn. It is. It doesn't have too many members, but people who are interested in from both parties are also welcome to join us.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yes, by the way, in general, please, if you'd like to drop the link to that in the comments, you don't have to do it right now because this will still be live.
Yeah.
But and Helen, to you as well, if you'd like to share some of the initiatives that you're involved with that other people can explore and get involved with, link them in the chat, and we'll direct people to those as well. So yes, please, and please don't not self-promote. Please do so. Okay, so I had another question. Again, something I think a lot about and can't always track very well over time, but I feel like when I get to talk with other folks in different domains, I can get a bit of a gauge on this. I'd love to hear your perspective on what you feel is the health of the field of organizational psychology in Canada. And the way I think about that is if it is extremely healthy, then people know about organizational psychologists. There is a demand for us in organizations and institutions. That would be very healthy. I'm curious how you feel about it from your perch. And even if you've seen progression over time, positive or negative, just where are we at as a field right now?
I think we could be healthier.
Probably.
Right? Because I think a lot of people would never think, oh, I need an I-O psychologist. They might think they need an HR consultant or a researcher or an executive coach, but they wouldn't necessarily think to find somebody with our background to provide any of that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if you go to a job bank, like let's say go to LinkedIn and search for jobs under the title of organizational psychologist or industrial and organizational psychologist, you probably won't find much under that brand. But change the title to organizational development consultant, then you will find jobs that industrial and organizational psychologists are trained to do. So I think it's not. I definitely think we can do better, but I also think it's not because of there's a need for services that I-O psychologists can provide. It's just the matter of branding. I think we just don't know there are people who are trained to do, who are trained and experienced to provide such kind of services.
And I think in fairness, part of the issue is that we are a tiny niche in psychology. When most people think of psychologist, they think of that person who you go to talk to about, feeling like you're languishing or you're depressed or you're anxious or you're having personal problems or relationship problems. So, I'm sure that's part of it. I'm sure that group, but are they like 70% of psychologists? It seems like they outnumber us by a lot.
And I think I agree with you. And there's also a discussion that happened in one of the scientist practitioner outlets of CSIOP, the Society of Industrial and Organizational Psychology. And it was about the brain drain. So people who are trained as industrial and organizational psychologists can move to other fields like organizational behavior, business schools, and I think it is important to to have and increase the number of I-O psychology programs in not just in Canada, but I think this was a broader discussion. But it is, I think, one other reason that, why we don't see so many I-O psychologists in universities. It's because they can be found under, different departments and different schools.
Yeah, absolutely. And as somebody who talks to a lot of prospective students, people who are interested in the field, I find I don't always say organizational psychology is for you. The more I understand what their goals and intentions are and the state of, what they would be walking into out of school, walking to the professional world, there's other avenues. I feel like a personal gauge of the health of the field in Canada is when I can say, yes, you should go to an I-O psychology program, and it's going to be fantastic because you're going to get into the field and people are going to know exactly what you do and how you are not sitting people on a couch and talking to them about their problems, but in fact are adding value in all sorts of different ways. And so I think we have we have a ways to go, and we have a role for organizations like CSIOP and PSYOP and all of us, Helen, like you said, collectively, individually, as advocates who represent the field, create that awareness and make the brand more clear and transparent to people. So I think there's a lot we can do collectively and individually on that. And with the couple of minutes that we have left, before I get to just some closing comments, quickly, just want to highlight a comment from Frank, who comments to Duygu's point. There is emerging research that the use of AI systems contributes to feelings of loneliness at work, and he very helpfully shares a link to that. So anybody who is looking to learn more about that, thank you, Frank, for sharing that. And again, appreciate the comments, appreciate everybody contributing to the discussion. And now at the time we have left, I want to ask if there's one sort of parting message that you'd like to share with somebody who's thinking about I-O psychology as a career or who is about to go into the field. What can you tell them about what it's like to give them a realistic job preview and help them? What's a parting message you can share with them?
Well, for me, it's been a very good field for me. It's been versatile. I've had a lot of variety in terms of roles I've played, and being able to move between organizations and individuals, and especially because I'm an outlier in a sense, not just in I-O, but as a Black person in psychology, I'm definitely an outlier, and I've just found it to be a very good base, a very good foundation. So 2 thumbs up in my perspective.
That wasn't my experience, but I know, like, when I was doing my master's and then PhD, I've seen many of my colleagues being torn between research and practice. So our time is limited. Should I go and do consulting and get to know the organizations, or should I just stay in my office and do reading and data analyzing? I think this is a good problem that you're likely to experience when you are in the graduate program, because we are such a versatile field, as Helen said. We have many options, and sometimes the problem is choosing between either or, not, and this is a good problem to have.
And I never, ever hear about I-O psychologists who can't earn a living.
PSYOP income surveys also, show that I-O psychologists, among other psychologists, are one of the better earners.
That's not an unimportant thing to sort of throw in there at the end. I appreciate you doing that.
Yeah. There's a good ROI, that's for sure.
Exactly. Okay, well, I'm bringing Deb, so you're not surprised. I'm bringing you back on from backstage. Deb has been hanging out, watching the discussion. Thank you to all of you. Congratulations to our award winners, Duygu and Helen. Thank you so much for joining the conversation today and sharing your perspectives and your experiences. I'd like to, again, remind everybody, connect with me on LinkedIn, follow CSIOP to stay up to date on upcoming events and discussions. Connect with Duygu, Helen, and Deb on LinkedIn as well. And if there are any other ways that people can find you and connect with you, please share that in the chat, in the comments. Some of the resources and groups that you mentioned, I think would be fantastic. And we look forward to continuing our conversations and staying in touch. And thank you all again. And I hope you have a great day.
Thank you. I've enjoyed this conversation immensely, and I appreciate the honor.
Yeah, and thank you very much for having us.
Yes, thanks so much for hosting this, Michael. And congratulations to our award winners.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
You too. Bye for now.